Tonight, we're going to start looking at the 7,000 year timeline. I believe you can find it in the scriptures if you know how to look for it. If you know how to rightly divide the word of God. That timeline, which we already saw in one example, using the Tav and the Yod, gave us a 4,000 year timeline from the beginning of time to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, this is nothing new. For thousands of years, religious scholars have taught that God does have a timeline, and it does consist of 7,000 years. And we're just about finished with this first 6,000 years. Now, I'm going to be reading tonight from other people's works. Once again, I'll try to stop in certain locations to clarify some things that I agree with or don't agree with. Hopefully there won't be that many of them as I skip around. But those of you who studied the Last Day series will know the dates and the timelines that I have used. If you haven't listened to the series, I suggest that you do. Listen to it and read it. But before we take a look at it, let's consider a fact that most Christians seem unaware of. That there's a prophecy in the Old Testament that clearly established the season of the Lord's first coming. Now, like I said, the people that have been around for a while don't need this really, but it's always a good review. That prophecy obviously is found in Daniel chapter 9, beginning with verse 24. You can go to it if you want to. I'm not tonight. And it's usually referred to as the prophecy of the 70 weeks of years. And I have done extensive teaching on that many, many years ago. And you can find it once again on the website, www.teachingfaith.com, written in video format. Now, this is where I pick up, and I'm going to start reading to you. The name of that prophecy comes to the fact that Daniel prophesies that certain events. I say I'm having mic problems. Let me begin again. The name of the prophecy comes from the fact that Daniel's prophecies, what prophecy are we talking about? The coming of the Messiah. That certain events will occur among the Jewish people over a period of 490 years, or 70 weeks of years. He states very clearly that the Messiah will come before the end of 483 of these years. The question then immediately emerges is, what is the starting point for the countdown of these years? Daniel says the countdown will begin with the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. That you can find in Daniel 9:25. After the Babylonian Empire was overthrown by the Medes and the Persians, 3 Persian kings issued edicts regarding the return of the Jews to their homeland. The first came in 538 BC, when Cyrus authorized the rebel to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. That can be found in Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. The second issued by Artaxerxes in 457 BC, which gave Ezra permission to reinstitute the temple services, appointed judges and teach the law. That's in Ezra 7, verse 11 through 26. And then in 445 BC, Artaxerxes issued a decree for Nehemiah to rebuild the city of Jerusalem and its walls. Nehemiah 2, verses 1 through 8. On the surface, the third decree, the one issued to Nehemiah, seems to be the most obvious candidate for the starting date of the prophecy, for it is the only one that specifically relates to the rebuilding of the city. For that reason, most commentators have selected it as the beginning of the 7 weeks of years. Using 445 BC, now I used in my timeline 444 BC. Once again, go back to the last day's teaching. So let me reread that. Using 444 BC at the starting point, experts in biblical chronology have concluded that the terminal point of 483 years would be 27 AD, and the earliest at the earliest, and 33 AD at the latest. The difference depends on whether you calculate using solar years or 360-day lunar years. Well, we use a calculating way of figuring out those years that converts lunar to solar and so forth in the last day's teaching. The point, of course, is that Jesus was born around, they say, 4 to 6 BC. I say 3 to 5 BC, and thus his arrival, and I lean towards 3 BC. And thus his arrival fits the prophecy, since his birth occurred before the latest possible terminal point of the prophecy. And this fact presents a major problem to the Jews, since they denied Jesus was the Messiah. If he was not, then how can they explain that the Messiah was not born within Daniel's time period? After all, they recognized Daniel as a legitimate prophet of God. The major point is that Daniel's prophecy clearly revealed the season of the Lord's first coming. And in like manner, there are prophecies in both the Old and New Testaments that reveal the season of the Lord's second coming. Not the date, but the general season. We'll see if we can get close. And it's my contention that those prophecies point to our day and time. And thus we are the terminal generation. Terminal generation. I agree with that. One of the most important of those prophecies is the one that's implied in the Genesis account of creation, as found in Genesis chapter 2. 1. Thus the heavens and earth were completed in all their hosts. 2. By the seventh day, God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all of his work. The creation count, which consists of 6 days of labor, followed by 1 day of rest, is God's template for time that is repeated over and over throughout the scriptures. Consider 1, the week of days, 6 days of labor, followed by the Sabbath of rest. 2, the week of weeks, 7 weeks or 49 days between Passover and the Feast of Pentecost, concluding with the Sabbath day of rest. 3, the week of months. The 7 months contain the 7 feasts of Israel, beginning with Passover in the spring and concluding with the Feast of Tabernacles in the fall, which is a celebration of rest from the agricultural labors of the year. The week of years, 7 years followed by a Sabbath year, when the land is allowed to rest from cultivation. 5, the week of weeks of years, 49 years leading up to the celebration, the 50th year of the Jubilee, and that year is to be a year of rest. 6, the week of millenniums, the idea that 6,000 years of human labor and strife will be followed by 1,000 years of rest during the millennial reign of the Messiah. The last example of the week template is a concept that some Jews and Christians have agreed upon the past 2,000 years. In fact, there is evidence that the concept predates the founding of the Jewish people with the call of Abraham. References to the 7,000-year theory can be found in writings attributed to Enoch, who lived in the 7th generation from Adam and was Noah's grandfather. Portions of at least 10 quotes from the Book of Enoch were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. These writings are not canonical, but there is a quotation from them in the New Testament book of Jude, in verses 14 and 15. It describes the second coming of the Messiah, pointing out that according to Enoch, the Messiah will one day come in judgment to pour out the wrath of God on ungodly sinners. We know from the non-biblical sources that the second book of Enoch stated that there would be 7,000 years of history, and that the beginning of the 8,000 year would mark the start of the eternal state. Now, depending which translation you read from, you usually can find that in 2 Enoch chapter 33, verse 1. Whether these writings date from the time of Enoch or were written later by someone using his name, they indicate that the idea of a 7,000 year of human history on this earth is a very old tradition. The oldest existing Jewish reference to the week of millenniums is probably the one found in the Talmud, which references a statement attributed to the prophetic school established by the prophet Elijah, which states, quote, 6,000 years is the duration of the world. 2,000 of the 6,000 years are characterized by chaos. 2,000 years are characterized by Torah. From the era of the patriarchs until the end of the Messianic period, and 2,000 years are the period of the coming of the Messiah. So you had the first 2,000 years was the years of chaos. From the moment sin came into existence on this planet through Adam, all the way to the flood. That's the first 2,000 years. Then followed by another 2,000 years characterized by Torah. Now, by the Torah, it's less than 2,000 years, which is, according to this, characterized by Torah, more like 14 to 1,500 years. But it doesn't matter. That was the second 2,000 era stage in the timeline. From the era of the patriarchs until the end of the Messianic period, and 2,000 years of the period of the coming of the Messiah, which I guess whether you're Jew or Christian, we're all waiting for that. This concept is echoed in the 10th century AD Midrash called Tana, T-A-N-N-A, Ve-Eliyahu. Second word is D apostrophe V-E-I. Third word is E-L-I-Y-A-H-U. That's for the transcribers. A Midrash is a commentary on part of the Hebrew scriptures. It reads as follows: the world is to exist 6,000 years. In the first 2,000 there was a desolation. No Torah from Adam to Abraham. 2,000 years the Torah flourished. And the next 2,000 years is the Messianic era. And it says, he should have come at the beginning of the last 2,000 years. The delay is due to our sins. Now, do I agree with that? No. But that's what they believe. Of course, Messiah did come at the beginning of the last 2,000 years, but he was not recognized by the Jewish people. This concept of 6,000 years of human toil and conflict, followed by 1,000 years of rest, is still alive among Jewish rabbis and is being taught by them. Take, for example, Rabbi Davison of Brooklyn, New York, who is a writer for the Chabad, C-H-A-B-A-D, and Orthodox Jewish Hasidic movement. When asked about the 7,000-year theory, he replied, quote, the Talmud tells us that this world, as we know it, will last for 6,000 years, with the 7th millennium ushering in the cosmic Sabbath, the Masonic era. 6 days a week we work, and on the Sabbath we rest and enjoy the fruits of our labor. The same is true with millenniums, end quote. The widespread acceptance of a 7,000-year concept among Jewish sages today is illustrated by the fact that the idea is accepted across the Ashkenazi and Sephardi divide. And across the rational Talmud and mystical Kabbalah perspectives. The Jewish millennial day theory was picked up by the earliest fathers of the Christian faith. For example, Justin Martyr, who lived between 100 and 165 AD, in his dialogue with Trypho, asserted his belief that the earth will last for 6,000 years, followed by a Sabbath of rest lasting 1,000 years. But even earlier than this, the concept was expressed in detail in the Epistle of Barnabas, the complete text of which is preserved in the 4th century Codex Sinaiticus, where it appeared immediately after the New Testament before the Shepherd of Hermas. Scholars estimate it was written between 70 and 132 AD. At least one apostle was still alive when this was written, possibly. The author describes the millennial day theory in these words, quote, this is from the Epistle of Barnabas, chapter 15. God made in 6 days of the work of his hands, and made it end on the 7th day, and rested on it, and sanctified it. Attend, my children, to the meaning of this expression. He finished in 6 days. This implies that the Lord will finish all things 6,000 years. For a day is with him 1,000 years. Therefore, my children, in 6 days, that is in 6,000 years, all things will be finished. And he rested on the 7th day. This means when his son shall come and shall abolish the time of the lawless one, and shall judge the ungodly, and shall change the sun and the moon and the stars, then shall he truly rest on the 7th day. Now, who's the lawless one there? When the false prophet and the beast are thrown into the lake of fire. Those of you who follow this ministry for any length of time and have gone through the Last Day series, you know who this is referring to. False prophet being Muhammad, and the beast system is Islam in all its players throughout history of Islam. Moon God followers. Late in the 2nd century, Irenaeus, that lived 130 to 202 AD, the Bishop of Lyons, France, wrote, quote, for in as many days as this world was made, in so many thousand years shall it be concluded. End of quote. He also wrote, the Lord will return and provide the world rest on the hallowed 7th day. One of the most influential theologians of the 3rd century, Hippolytus, that's Hyppolytus, of Rome, lived 170 to 235 AD, asserted that 6,000 years must needs to be accomplished in order that the Sabbath may come, the rest, the holy day on which God rested from all his works. The widespread belief in the millennial day theory among early Christians is attested to by Edward Gibbon in his History of the Roman Empire. He wrote, the ancient and popular doctrine of millennium was intimately connected with the second coming of Christ, as the works of the creation had been finished in 6 days. Their duration in the present state, according to the tradition which was attributed to the prophet Elijah, was fixed to 6,000 years. By the same analogy, it was inferred that this long period of labor and contention, which was now almost elapsed, would be succeeded by a joyful Sabbath of 1,000 years, and that Christ, with the triumphant band of saints and the elect who had escaped death or who had been miraculously revived, would reign upon the earth till the time appointed for the last and general resurrection. Now that was Edward Gibbons. I don't know if he was a Christian or not. I have nothing that tells me he was a true follower of the Christian faith. But even he put together the most complete works in the Roman history. Even he wrote about it, put it down in writing, what everyone knew about. During those early church days history. And it goes further back in just the early days of Christianity, as I read to you. It goes beyond that, further back. But despite this early popularity of the concept, it fell out of the acceptance after 400 AD. Why? When the Roman Catholic Church, under the influence of the spiritualizing interpretations of Origen and Augustine, adopted the amillennial viewpoint, which argued that Jesus is never going to return to reign over this earth for 1,000 years. The millennial day theory experienced a renaissance following the Reformation as people began to obtain copies of the Bible in their own language. The premillennial viewpoint of end times events was revived, and with it, the idea that 6,000 years of history would be followed by a 1,000-year reign of Jesus. The concept was strongly endorsed in the first best-selling Bible prophecy book in history, Jesus is Coming by W.E. Blackstone. Now, if you can find a copy of that, you probably have to pay probably around $100 or more, maybe less if you can find a copy of it. I'm still looking for a first edition myself because it was first published in 1898. But the concept was strongly endorsed in his first best-selling Bible prophecy book in history, Jesus is Coming by W.E. Blackstone, first published in 1898. He pointed out that the concept was first developed by the Jewish sages before the time of Christ and is frequently mentioned in the Talmud. He called it the Sabbath of God's weeks. Many modern-day Bible prophecy teachers have endorsed the theory. For example, in 2012, Dr. Jack Van Impe, who lived between 1931 and 2020, used to be on television. I don't really recommend most of his teaching on eschatology. It's based on Christian science fiction. But just because your teachings are based on Christian science fiction doesn't mean that you got everything wrong. I believe this is one thing he did get right, but he's not the one that came up with it. This has been around, like I said, for thousands of years. He believed that we were on the threshold of the final days. And I agree with that. We're in the last few moments before midnight, friends. It might even be closer than that. Time is closing in upon us. The age of grace is coming to the close. And the believers that put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ are going to reign with him when he returns with us there alongside him. Distinguished Christian doctrinal expert Mike Gedron, Gendron, echoed the second 1,000-year theory in an article he published in 2013, which he observed the first 2,000 years of human history ended when the wrath of God was poured out on sin in the flood. The second 2,000 years ended with the wrath of God was poured out on sin at the cross. And the third 2,000 years will end with God pouring out his wrath on sin during the tribulation. That's where I do disagree with him, because I think the tribulation has been going on a lot longer than most people think. And I've covered that in the Last Day series. But that's about the only part of that statement that he made I disagree with. All of this brings us to a crucial question. If this millennial day theory is biblical, then how near are we to the end of the 6,000 years that will inaugurate the millennial reign of Jesus? This is not an easy question to answer. The first question relates to the starting point of the 6,000 years. James Ussher, who lived between 1581 and 1656, the Archbishop of Arlen in the early 17th century, and a profound scholar, calculated the beginning of the world to be 4004 BC, or exactly 4,000 years before the generally accepted date of the birth of Jesus in 4 BC. He based his findings on the biblical genealogies. Many have challenged Ussher's calculations. Others who accepted them have argued that the starting date for the 6,000-year countdown should be the date when Adam sinned. That day, of course, is not known. Well, we'll see about that. Let's see if we could figure that one out. And has been estimated to be in anywhere from a few months after creation to as much as 110 years. The second question relates to the starting point for the countdown of the last 2,000 years, from the birth of Jesus or from his death. In either case, what is the correct date? Some argue he was born in 4 BC, others in 6 BC. The general accepted date for his crucifixion is 38 AD. And I don't know if you remember last time I was on this subject, I said, let's give it a range now from about 28 AD to 33 AD. We will zero in on a better date than that. But for now, we're just going to keep it in the range where most people, some people even take it to 36 AD, but we'll keep it in the range where most people that study this have some agreement on. Counting 2,000 years, but this author believes, and he's convinced that the death of Jesus was around 31 AD. Counting 2,000 years from 31 AD places return around the year 2031. That's becoming popular. In my research, I found nearly all writers speculating anywhere from 2026 to 2033. I'll tell you this much. It's not 2026 and it's not 2033. Another problem with all these calculations is whether you use normal years according to solar calendar or lunar years of 360 days. And this is further complicated by the fact that the Jews use a lunar/solar calendar. And that's just the beginning, by the way, of the problem. So as you can see, it's not possible to precisely calculate either the beginning or ending of the 6,000 years from creation. But by any calculation, the conclusion has to be that we are near the end. However, there is a question that immediately emerges from my conclusion. If we are near the end of 6,000 years of human history, why is this the year 5781 on the Jewish calendar? In other words, if we are so near to the end of 6,000 years, why did the Jewish calendar say we are 219 years away from that date? There is really a very simple answer to the question. Just as the Western Gregorian calendar is off by 4 to 6 years, which most people don't even realize that, the Jewish calendar contains an even greater error of over 200 years. The calculation of the years of the Jewish calendar, according to the Talmud, was done in the 2nd century by a rabbi. I'll spell the first name, Y-O-S-E, second name B-E-N, and last name H-A-L-A-F-T-A. His rabbinic chronology is called the Seder Olam Rabbah. Seder is S-E-D-E-R, Olam is O-L-A-M, and Rabbah is R-A-B-B-A-H. I have a copy of it here. I don't recommend anyone spend the money purchasing it because it has errors. My copy is almost 200 pages. Quite frankly, if you like to read nothing like genealogies, then get a copy. But if you don't, it's not worth the dollars, to tell you the truth. It's almost universally agreed that the calendar is off by at least 200 years due to the fact that the rabbi guessed wrong as to the length of the intertestament period for which there was no biblical records. This period is referred to by the secular historians as the Persian period. The rabbinical chronology says it lasted 52 years. The accepted chronology of historical experts says it lasted 207 years, amounting to a difference of 155 years. And I'm going to give you another book. I'm just giving you books left and right today. A remarkable book published in 1997 examines this problem in detail and proves beyond a shadow of doubt. Did I bring my copy? No, I don't think I did. That the Jewish chronology is seriously flawed, and yes, it is. It is titled Jewish History in Conflict. The author is a New York attorney, an Orthodox Jew by the name of Mitchell First. All the errors he points out in the Jewish calendar amount to a total of 200 years. With such overwhelming evidence of a major errors in the Jewish calendar, why don't the Jews correct their calendar? Now, I'm tempted to go through all these calculations to show you why Mitchell First concluded that it's off by a minimum of 200 years. Maybe I will do it, maybe I won't, because I don't want to. But we'll see. With such overwhelming evidence of major errors in the Jewish calendar, why don't the Jewish correct their calendar? The force of tradition is undoubtedly one of the main reasons. Another is what is called the Jewish circles, the doctrine of faith and the pronouncement of the sages. This doctrine requires that the Jewish sages be given the benefit of the doubt. There is a third reason for Jewish reluctance, one that most rabbis and scholars are reluctant to admit. Mitchell First denies that if any of the significance, denies that it is of any significance, but he quotes 3 Jewish scholars who bluntly state that they are convinced the reason is the most important. It is the idea that Jewish sages purposely stated an incorrect chronology of Daniel 9 in order to prevent people from using the passage to accurately predict the time when the Messiah would come. The bottom line is that instead of this being the Jewish year of 5781, it should be a lot closer to the 6,000 year date. The Rabbi Halafta, a 2nd century rabbi, just to give you a few of the problems that he created when he was dating and putting the chronology together in the Seder Olam Rabbah. Just for an example, he mixes up the 7 years of the Gog-Magog battle with the 70-year captivity that the Jews went through. He later changed it from 70 years to 52 years. But right there alone, even if that is the correct chronology, you're still off by 18 years. In just that one example alone. I believe the writers of the Talmud especially wanted to reject Jesus Christ as the Messiah. So they deliberately changed the timeline to make it look like Jesus did not fulfill the Daniel prophecies. Whatever the reason, the Jewish date is off. And I gave you one example of just either 63 years or 18 years. And that's just one example. There's more. If I get into that teaching on what went wrong back in the 2nd century AD, started by this rabbi, and actually, even before Christ that came on the scene, around 200 AD, they start screwing around with the dates on the Jewish calendar. But that's another study altogether. I'm not sure if I'm going to go there. This writer concludes that no one can know the date of the Lord's return. The signs of the times and the prophecies like the ones considered indicate that we are the eternal generation living the season of the Lord's return. That's one source. Let me read you another one. About 10 minutes to get through this. The millennial day for 1,000-year concept is very simple and easy to grasp. God gave mankind from the beginning a 7 literal day repeating cycle. God then revealed that from his perspective that each literal creation day was as 1,000 years and 1,000 years as one day from his divine perspective, leaving us in no doubt as to what he had on his mind. He further revealed in his word that the importance of the number 7. Throughout the Bible, the number 7, considered a sacred number, meant divine completion. The basic concept is that God has given man 6,000 years to work. That work will cease at the end of 6,000 years, to be followed by 1,000 years of rest. So in a nutshell, the 7,000-year millennium perspective believes that the age of mankind started with the year of creation, unfolds for 6,000 years of labor, and ends with the last 1,000 years of rest. And that's why we look at the Bereshit prophecy. That's why we looked at last week the Yod Tav prophecy, which reveals how many years went by before the crucifixion would take place. Can it give us a precise year when that happened? And if it did, that would be a benchmark of trying to figure out other things that still has to be accomplished in the prophetic calendar. As I showed you, there was exactly 4,000 years between creation and the cross of Calvary. Now we'll find that tune that even more in the weeks to come. Back to this. If you believe the millennial day for 1,000 years perspective, you might say that the prophecy of Jesus coming back, or not coming back, the prophecy that Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection was 4,000 years would be close enough without knowing the exact date of that happening. After all, if Jesus died on the cross in 30 AD, and the prophecy predicts that the cross event is going to happen 4,000 years starting from creation date of approximately 4004 BC, then that is close enough, right? The problem is that when you do the math starting with the creation date for 4004 BC and going forward 4,000 years, you're left with an extra 33 to 33 and a half years. For some, that is close enough, but for those that take God's word literally, it's a real problem. With the perspective that missing the mark by only 33 years is close enough, it would be impossible to predict the future events on God's millennial calendar with any precision. I agree with that. If 1,000 years is no longer a literal time span, but it's simply a rough estimate, then the millennial day for 1,000 years perspective is no longer a prophecy, but simply a concept which precision is not the object of the revelation. Is there evidence in the Bible based on prophetic times revealed as a harbinger of future events? That would warrant this sort of variation and imprecision when it comes to God's revelation regarding when something is going to take place. In other words, when God says 1,000 years, can we take him seriously? And literally, or are we just to take it as an approximation? Now, I say God is precise. He's a God of order, and he's a God of timelines. He uses it over and over. And there's many examples of that in the Last Day series. For example, the Bereshit Yod Tav time step that we looked at, prophecy revealed the exact precise year when the crucifixion of Jesus would take place, starting from, let's just say, 4,000 BC, the year of creation, and going forward from that point, 4,000 years? I guess the answer to that is no. We have to look at it from another perspective. Let me continue. Let's consider that God in his great wisdom did not provide us the exact year of the crucifixion year, starting with the countdown from creation. What I just said. Instead, God provided us with something even more amazing than that. God provided us with a measuring rod that reveals time in 1,000-year increments, a millennial view that is designed to take us right back to the first chapter in Genesis, where we are meant to consider again the meaning of the 6 days of creation. Now, I've been doing that. That's why we're looking at the first three words in the King James, but it's really two words, in beginning. In the beginning, in Genesis 1:1. 6 days of labor followed by the seventh day of rest. Do you see the prophetic pattern that forecasts the millennial reign of the Messiah in every cycle of the 6 days of creation followed by the seventh day of rest? Notice the weekly pattern that God designed to repeat hundreds of thousands of times as both a rehearsal and a prophetic harbinger that heralds the final seventh day. In this foreshadowing of the 1,000th year millennium reign of God's Son on earth, God has provided us a millennial time span that is complementary and consistent with the 6 days for 1,000 years pattern God set forth as a pattern in Genesis 1. Consider that the one day with the Lord is 1,000 years revelation revealed in both the Old and New Testament gives us the divine perspective that is ultimately confirmed by the Lord Jesus himself. Jesus reveals this time perspective 6 times in the book of Revelation. It's a coincidence. It is a coincidence that 6,000 years is the exact time period that must end before he inaugurates his seventh day upcoming kingly reign on the earth. The seventh day, the final day, will last exactly 1,000 years. If the seventh day is exactly 1,000 years, then the other 6 days must also be precisely 1,000 years each. 6,000 equals 6 days equals 6,000 years. This is a foundational numeric concept that fueled the Sabbath millennial end times perspective, the oldest eschatology in the world. This is a prophetic viewpoint held by the ancient Jewish rabbis and the early church fathers. The millennial perspective is now out of favor with the biblical literalists because it seems to have failed. Many Christians who believe that millennial day for 1,000-year perspective, calculated from the start date of creation in 4004 BC, would climax in the second coming of Christ in the years leading up to the year 2000 AD. It would be prudent to highlight that many Christians today cannot distinguish between the second coming of Christ and the rapture of the church. They are, in fact, two separate events. The rapture is the departure of the church and is a signless event. The second coming is an event which will result in accumulation of or conclusion of all things on earth. Many are confused about the two-stage coming of Jesus in the last days, just as they were confused about his first coming. God has a wonderful purpose that is gloriously displayed in his plans as they unfold on the earth. Misunderstandings abound in these final days as Satan is stirring the pot of chaos and confusion in order to remove Christians from the wonderful promises made to them as members of the mystery church that has been revealed in these last days. If you read Matthew 24, you will not come away with the idea that Jesus is telling his disciples that his second coming is a forbidden topic. On the contrary, Jesus encouraged them to observe the signs and be prepared for his return. This is the most ascribed to and enduring end times perspective held by both Jews and Gentiles. This is the end times eschatology and has been taught and as an end time outlook for over 3,000 years. Now, I read through a lot of information quickly, but I just wanted to review just two sources. There are many sources out there that do subscribe to the 7,000-year timeline cycle. Do I believe we're coming close to the closing of the 6,000 years of the cycle? I absolutely do. Now we're going to break down this 6,000 years further as we look at the Bereshit prophecy. There's more to it than even what is taught out there concerning this prophecy. We just have to put our biblical detective caps on and dig in, roll up our sleeves and dig in, and see what truth we could pull from these, I believe, amazing scriptures right from the beginning. God has declared the end from the beginning. There's no doubt about it in my mind. And there's no doubt about it in my mind also there's not a 7,000-year cycle that needs to play out. And the 8,000 year. Some unfortunately believe the 7,000 year is the eternal state. God still deals with the unbeliever. From year 7,000 to 8,000. in 8,000 years, the eternal state. That's all I'll say about that for now. This is nothing new, friends. It's been preached and taught on for centuries and millenniums. It did lose its popularity around 400 AD, but it's regained steam, and it's now coming back on the scene as we see how God cycles through time. And if you're interested in going through this timeline, I want to hear from you. Now, tonight was just reading other sources that touches briefly on the 7,000 year timeline. Sometimes I like to read from other sources to show you that I'm not just making this stuff up from thin air. Like I said, it's been around a long time. And we're going to dig in and get to the bottom of it to see what else we can find out. And can we get close to knowing when our Lord is coming back and when that 7,000th year begins? If you're interested, let me know. Play the song.